Talk about Napoleon conquering everything. Okay, so in this time, it is customary for leaders of countries to give each other gifts. For example, before invading Spain, Napoleon gave the King of Spain a pair of pistols, so decorative pistols, some fancy pistols. He also gave the king some fancy, expensive dresses for the ladies that are in the court. He gave the king fancy jewels. And he gave the king, the king of Spain gave Napoleon 16 horses from his best stables. But he also hired Jacques Louis David to paint a portrait for Napoleon. Do you guys remember Jacques Louis David? All right, he painted The Oath of the Horatii, The Death of Marat. And so he paints this picture of Napoleon. You might have seen this painting before. Have you seen this painting before? All right, it's one of those popular paintings. All right, it is an iconic equestrian painting. The story goes that while David was painting Napoleon for this, like during the process of painting, Napoleon refused to sit still for the painting. And David said, "How can I paint you if you won't sit still for me?" And Napoleon said, "It isn't the exactness or features, a wart of the nose, that gives the resemblance. Nobody knows that the portraits of great men actually resemble them. It is enough that their genius lives there." That's what Napoleon said. So he gave David the freedom to be creative. So he made this awe-inspiring, and uh, the wind blowing makes it more dramatic. Notice the calm expression on his face as the horse rears up. All right, and this is in the long line of the tradition of leaders having their portraits as they are on horseback. Do you remember what I told you that the horse is a symbol of? The horse is a symbol of the kingdom. So the guy on the horse is in control of the kingdom. He painted 5 copies of this portrait. He painted the original, and then 3 extra copies for Napoleon, and then he painted an extra one for himself. Now, excuse me, I'm sorry. These this image is not entirely accurate. It depicts Napoleon crossing the Alps with his army into Italy, and which is a very heroic thing to do, but it didn't look like this at all. All right, this is very inaccurate because you can see the army behind him, and you can see they are pulling the cannons up the narrow hill. Do you not see them? All right. Let's get my pen. And we got right here are some guys carrying the cannon. We've got a couple other guys right here. And we got a guy over here. And there's this trail going up the mountain. And that's where they are all going. And Napoleon is right there with his troops, leading from the front, as all leaders should. That was entirely incorrect or inaccurate. He not only did not lead from the front, he led from the back. In fact, he followed his army a couple days after they crossed the Alps. So he wasn't with them at all. And also, he did not ride this magnificent stallion over the Alps with the wind blowing and the horse rearing up and so majestic and virile. He was riding a donkey led by a peasant. All right, a very uh, uh, almost like an embarrassing mode of travel for an emperor, right? Okay, so Jacques Louis David becomes the main painter or the painter for Napoleon. So let's take a look at a couple of his artworks. We're going to take a look at this one right here, right? The Emperor Napoleon in a study. What's one thing you notice about this portrait? What odd thing do you see? Did I hear it? His hand, yeah. What's the deal with his hand? All right, in almost every portrait of Napoleon, he has his hand inside of his shirt. All right, so why does Napoleon have his hand inside of his shirt? Because it's in image after image after image of Napoleon. Well, the answer is it's not just Napoleon, but just about everybody did it. You can see all these portraits. A guy has his hand inside of his jacket or his waistcoat. So the answer goes back to the ancient Greeks. Aeschines proclaimed that restricting the movement of your hand is the proper and dignified pose for speaking. And that's because when Aeschines spoke, he did not use wild gestures, but his nemesis did. All right, Demosthenes was a rival of his, and he had wild hand gestures when he spoke. So Aeschines says only the dignified people don't use these wild hand gestures, thus insulting his nemesis, insulting his, I guess, his enemy. So that created this tradition of being very still is an expression of dignity. And even at the time of the portrait of Napoleon, there's this etiquette book for gentlemen, and it says the instructions for what to do while you're standing there in the green at the bottom is to put your hand inside your waistcoat. So that was a very common thing for men to do at this time. Also, what another bit of context going on that Napoleon is in the middle of conquering Europe, and he's made a huge enemy of England. England hates him, and they make a lot of propaganda to insult Napoleon. And one of their propaganda claims is that he was very short. And let me back up and go back to the hand. That he was prone to fits of temper tantrums, so that he had wild gestures with his hands, and so Napoleon's portrait done by Jacques Louis David is very different than Napoleon images done by cartoonists in England, showing him as being a little tyrant. Also, they portrayed him as being short when the actual, I don't know if you ever heard of the Napoleon complex. Have you ever heard that term before? Right. That's when the idea that when men are very short, they overcompensate by being a little tyrant. And what that reminds me of is in, I don't know if you've seen the movie The Incredibles, when he worked at the insurance company. His boss was a very short man, but an absolute tyrant. All right, that's the Napoleon complex. All right, so moving on to the painting. He is dressed like the Imperial Guard. So the image on the right is an illustration of what the officers and the soldiers wore at that time. So he's dressed like a soldier. So you can almost imagine like a current president having himself his portrait painted while he's wearing army fatigues. Like so it's even though he's well, all right. So he's dressed like a soldier. The clock in the back says 4:17 in the morning. Why? Why would he have his portrait painted and the clock show 4:17 in the morning? What's the benefit? How does this make him look good? Yeah, he's up early. He's getting stuff done. All right, but there's a little bit more to it. Look at the candles in the background. All right, are those new candles or old candles? All right, how can you tell? Right, they're very short. They've been burning for a long time. That means he's been up all night. So not only is it early in the morning, but he hasn't slept yet. And then if you look down at the bottom, all right, by his feet, there is a map, a military map. So he's been up all night planning his military conquests. On his other side, there is a sword resting on a chair, which is a reference to his military conquest. But the papers that are behind him, not only are there military maps, but it is the new laws that he has written. So not only is he planning military campaigns throughout the night, but he's also writing laws that will hopefully benefit everybody. But that is the propaganda that is oozing out of this portrait here. All right, speaking of propaganda, we're going to go to this painting right here. How big is this painting? Yeah, in Texas, we call that a big one. All right, and you can see by this photograph right here that the people painted in the photograph are pretty much life size. And this painting is 20 by 33 feet. All right, again, that's a big one. All right, so what is this a painting of? It's a painting of the coronation of Napoleon. I'll give you a moment to write the information down. So think about this. Why did France have a revolution? To get rid of what? Kings and queens and a monarchy, right? And to develop a democratic a system of government. Napoleon gives himself the title of emperor. What's wrong with that? Right. That's the exact thing that they fought to get rid of. That's how egotistical this guy is. That he crowns himself the emperor. And look at this ceremony. This is the same kind of, I don't know if you watched the coronation of the king when King Charles became king. It was like this. They had this type of pomp and circumstance. And this is what they fought to get rid of, to have, this ordained by God kind of this attitude that the king is all powerful. And the other thing that happened in this, well, I'll talk about it in a second. All right, I'm going to go through my notes. All right, there were no coronations for emperor before this or after. So even like other empires that had emperors, they didn't do a coronation ceremony. So he's just making this stuff up just for himself. This ceremony was designed by Napoleon himself. The Pope didn't even want to be there either. The Pope is sitting right behind. This is the Pope right here. All right. But also, the Pope did not want to jeopardize his relationship to France. So he attended only to keep an open. It would have been an insult to Napoleon if he had not gone there. All right, the people in here have been identified. We'll go over a couple of the people. Like I said, that is the Pope sitting behind him. That is Napoleon holding the crown up. And in front of him, that is Josephine, his wife. The story goes is that the ceremony was supposed to be the Pope or a priest putting the crown on top of Napoleon. But instead, he took that crown and placed it on his own head. And the message there is that you're not in charge, I'm in charge. So he's even breaking the tradition that he himself just started, or he's breaking the ceremony, the rules of the ceremony that he just made up. The amount of arrogance that happens here. Now, the drawing on the left is the original drawing that David did, and this is more accurate to what actually happened. Is that when Napoleon placed it on his head, that's what it looked like. Napoleon had him change it to holding up the crown in front of him because holding it over his head would look a little bit too arrogant. So Napoleon did indeed see that what he did was actually a little bit too far. So he told David to, hey, take it back a little bit. Even though this whole painting, everything about this is too far. It's too arrogant. All right, on the far left are his brothers. And there's two brothers. The one on the far left did not attend the coronation because of in-family fighting with his brother Napoleon. There are his sisters that are right there. The mother is in the background. She was also not at the coronation because she is having fights with Napoleon. So it's not a happy family. The Napoleon family is not happy, but he has David paint them all there to make it look like they're a happy family, even though they were not even there. All right, again with the propaganda. And then he paints himself into the picture over here. Okay, our next artist is Ingres. It's spelled Ingres. The rest of it is in green. I should be in that purple, but you just need to write down Ingres. It's pronounced Ingres, but I've also heard it pronounced Ang or Angre. So I just call him Anger. I thought that was funny. Of course, if he was sitting here, he'd probably yell at me or something. All right, he is another Napoleonic artist, and I love his work. He does such beautiful work, and so much of it is realistic. Like, look at the folds that are in the clothes or in the dress of that. Aubrey. What kind of a painting is this? Is this a still life? Is it a genre painting? Is it a landscape? It's a history painting, right? It's a history painting because it's very mythological, right? That's the, like, history paintings is about something that happened in history or the Bible or in mythology. Ingres wants to be a history painter, but here's one of his paintings of Napoleon. And tell me that's not arrogant right there. that he is posed much like do I have it here? Yeah, he is posed like Jupiter. He's posed like a god. And the statue of Zeus at Olympia, like he has this classical pose right here, and that makes him look like he's immortal. All right, a couple other things about this. It's said to look like the Ghent altarpiece, where you have that round halo behind him looks a lot like the Ghent altarpiece. And this painting right here, this painting of Napoleon, is total propaganda. Angers portrays Napoleon as the emperor of the French, but it also references Napoleon as a divine ruler. The furniture, the clothes, the setting all transform Napoleon from a mere mortal to a powerful god. The throne and the armrest is that of a god. And like I just mentioned, that round backed throne is similar to the Ghent altarpiece. And then there are classical references in this. So there's a pilaster that is back there, and that's similar to Roman architecture that we saw in the Masaccio painting. On the carpet in front of Napoleon, there's an imperial eagle that appears on the rug. And then on the right, there is a cartouche. All right, what is a cartouche? This is a cartouche, this oval shape over here. And you can see it's the oval shape is right over here. All right, and then there are two images inside the cartouche as seen on the left-hand side of the rug. This one right here is the scales of justice. And then the one below it, this one right here, is a representation of Raphael's Madonna del Seggiola. All right, so he's referencing classical imagery in the carpet down below him. On the back wall over Napoleon's left is a partially visible heraldic shield. And there it is. And then this is an Italian symbol, not French. And the meaning is that this ties the Emperor Napoleon to the Papal States and Rome. He's not just French anymore, but he's total European. Like because he's conquered so much of it that it all belongs to him. Just Italy, France, all of it. And with his upper right hand, he grasps the scepter of Charlemagne. And Charlemagne was one of the rulers Napoleon most sought to emulate. And Charlemagne's name appears on the portrait of Napoleon crossing the Alps. I already talked about this pose. It makes him look like a god. And then the jewel-encrusted coronation sword hangs from his left hip, and the sword is a symbol of his rulership. And it can be hardly seen because of the extravagant nature of Napoleon's coronation robes. Now, notice the white fur on this. This is the fur of an ermine. You remember an ermine from the Leonardo painting. And then the little black tails. You see the tip of the ermine has that black tip. So now you can count this. You can count all those little black tips and see how many ermines it took to make this collar or this robe for him. The Legion of Honor hangs from the emperor's shoulders. And a gilded laurel wreath is on his head, a classical symbol of victory. All right, so just the amount of arrogance that goes into these paintings of Napoleon is quite impressive. All right, and then we have this painting right here. Let's take a look at this painting by Angers. He did lots of portraits for income, but he hated portraits. Like I said, he wanted to be a history painter, but his patrons all wanted portraits. What amazes me about this painting, though, What's the most impressive thing to you? Yeah, right. The texture on that dress. It looks like silk, right? The way it shines, it's quite impressive. And then there's a sharp contrast between the clarity of the fabric with the softness of the skin. The proportions of the arms seem a little bit off, like there's no musculature or bones visible. It's not as rounded as it should be. And the proportions are idealized and not realistic. Like the neck is a little bit too long, the eyes a little bit too big. It almost looks like her eyes are going in two different directions. So let's see. All right, the one on the left, that is Pauline Del Gaillard, and she is married to a politician. She was 28 at the time of the painting. She was highly intelligent and widely known for her beauty, but she suffered from profound shyness, and the painting captures her melancholia. Pauline contracted tuberculosis in her early 30s and died in 1860 at age 35. The husband lived until 1901. He was heartbroken and did not remarry. All right, the other one, the Countess on the right, she was born into a wealthy and important family, married at 18, and the portrait is when she is 20 years old. All right, moving on. We're going to take a look at the Grand Odalisque. So let's take a closer look. All right, Odalisque is a woman in a harem. Are we good to go? All right, so what is a harem? A harem is a room in the Arabic countries. It is a room for reserved for women in a family. So it is where the women or the wives hang out of a polygamous man. And you can see some of the Arabic kind of, or the, and I want to say the term Oriental. All right, so the term Oriental is we kind of think of it as being of like Chinese and the Orient, or the like the Western view of the Orient. Oriental means in art, it means everything east of Europe, and that includes the Middle East. So this is a very foreign place to Europe at that time, and Europeans are quite fascinated with the Middle East. And you can see like the turban on her head, the fan in her hand, and some of the other. You can see a bit of a hookah in there, and you can see all these little parts of the Middle East in there, and that was a very popular thing at that time. Also, I don't know if I have it in my notes that her anatomy is a bit off. We'll talk about that in a second. All right, Anga was a student of David, and nudes have been a tradition since the ancient times. And so I talked about how Titian's Venus of Urbino is the beginning of the reclining nude in a painting. But even in the Renaissance, there's a return to classical nudes. And the rule is that nudes are distanced by time and not a contemporary figure. So nudes are like goddesses or people from long ago, and they are not people of today. And here we have like somebody of today or the time that the painting was made. She is surrounded by lush satins, and I pointed out the peacock feathered fan and the turban. These are things from the Middle East. So these are almost like it's almost like a costume that she's put on. The left elbow presses into the fabric and shows the weight, the weight that she's pushed onto the fabric. There's a nice compositional moment right here where the curve of the curtain and blends in with the curve of her hand and goes right up to the curve of her nose. It makes this nice U shape and guides the eye around. All right, so and then, but there's her. It's almost like her bones are like rubbery. There's no, like the feet are a little bit small. The ear is a little bit small. Like there's all these weird and anatomical imperfections in this. So that's one of the things that's piqued people's interest in this painting. All right, so returning to Napoleon. Uh, like I said, he had conquered a lot of Europe, and he was a total badass on the battlefield. And he got a little bit too arrogant and decided to go and take Russia, and not really realizing just how insanely huge Russia is, and not really planning on how cold Russia gets in the winter. He thought that he could just march up to Moscow, conquer it, and bunker down in Moscow for the winter. But it took way too long to even to get to Moscow, and he got stuck in the horrible winters, one of the worst winters that Russia had, and his troops were totally unprepared for that sort of weather. They hadn't planned on being in Russia through the winter. So he went in with 400,000 troops, and then he came out of Russia with only 40,000 troops. So that means what? 90% died. All right. And most died from the cold, not from battles. And then that is when the rest of Europe began to see a weakness in Napoleon. So they all started fighting back. And after the defeat of Napoleon in Russia, the enemies of Russia or the enemies of France smelled blood and closed in on him. And he was eventually captured and sent into exile on the island of Elba, in which he escaped. And when he came back to England, or when he came back to the shore in Italy, his troops were there waiting for him. Remember, his troops, like he had taken his troops into battle, and he had won so many times. His troops loved him because he was a military genius, and so he had a very strong following with his troops. So he was able to muster an army very quickly and go and try to do it all over again, conquer Europe all over again. But this time, Europe just wasn't having it. And so in Belgium, next to Waterloo, we had the last battle of Napoleon, where he was defeated by the British, and then he was exiled to St. Helena, which is halfway between Africa um, uh, and South America. So there was no escaping for him, and he was under. You can see in the picture right there, he's under constant guard. All right. Any questions about any of the artwork that we've looked at? That closes us for the Napoleon section of this chapter 27. All right, so we are going to go. Let's see, let's go. No, I don't want to. I want to discard them. Let's go to 27 part 2. All right, so much art history and never enough time to cover it all. So let's go run through the art museum. We are going to do chapter 27. We are in part 2 of chapter 27. All right. So our next style of art that we're going to look at is called Romanticism. And this is kind of confusing to students. The term romantic makes people often think of people that are in love, right? It's the romantic comedy is a comedy about people in love. Well, that is not what romanticism is about. All right, so think about the two different parts of your mind. You have the heart, which is your emotion, and your brain, which is logic. And some people favor the emotional side of their personality. Some people favor the logical side of the personality. And also, over some time, cultures tend to gravitate towards logic, and some cultures tend to gravitate towards emotion. And this happens over time as well. Do you guys know what a pendulum is? Pendulum swings back and forth. All right, so it's like a pendulum. We have pendulums and clocks. And if you go to the Science Museum here in Houston, there's a giant pendulum that shows the rotation of the Earth, which is a filthy lie. All right, so I kind of see this as a crane's pendulum, and I don't know if you ever saw the Miley Cyrus video where she's on the wrecking ball. So we're gonna do a Miley Cyrus wrecking ball of history of art with Miley Cyrus. So when we looked at the Renaissance, the pendulum swung over to the rational side. Renaissance art was a very rational type of art. And then the pendulum swung over after Renaissance, it swung over to the irrational mannerism style. And then it swung back to the rational art of the Baroque. And then it swung back to the irrational art of the Rococo. And then it swung back to, I'm going the wrong way. It swung back to the rational art of neoclassicism. And now we're going to swing back over to the irrational art of Romanticism. So romanticists appreciate, do you guys, everybody get that? So romanticists appreciate spontaneity over planning, and individuality is more than they appreciate individuality. Let me try that again. They appreciate individuality more than conformity. So they are all about emotion, and they do not like logic. So the romanticists are looking at this neoclassical art and seeing it as like what they get the ick from it. It's a rebellion from the principles and values of neoclassicism. Neoclassical art is a rational approach to society, living, and Greco-Roman ideals. And neoclassical is seen as soulless and dispassionate. And Romanticism emerges first in Germany in literature. And the core of Romanticism breaks with antiquity. Antiquity so dear to the Renaissance and the neoclassicists. And like the neoclassicists, you can read art like you can read poetry or understanding. And the romanticists don't like that. So the new thinking is that art is not rational. The new thinking is that anti-rational or emotional understanding of the world. And the German attitude is called Sturm und Drang, which means storm and stress. So romanticism is the truth is not derived from intellect, but instead from emotion, faith, and spirituality. Emotion is more important than intellect and reason. So we have paintings like this where we have nature versus nature. This is one of the themes of romanticism. We have a lion attacking a horse. Nature versus nature is a very popular theme in romanticism. Man versus nature is a very popular theme in romanticism. And visual drama is another popular theme of romanticism. And we are going to stop here with Fuseli. We will start with Fuseli tomorrow after we take our picture. Any questions about anything we discussed at all today?